Stockholm, Sweden is an amazing place. The country of Sweden is just fantastic. Not a day goes by that I don't think about the beautiful landscape, the wonderful people there. The food in Sweden was really good. It's a lot like the food we have here, but it feels healthier as you eat it. It's not quite as fatty as what we're used to here. One of my favorite dishes that they had was this meatloaf that I ate. It was a mixed meat meatloaf. It had moose, cow, and beef and pork in it mixed together. It was all like ground meats, and then they mixed it together into this meatloaf, served it with some black currant jam and potatoes and a brown sauce. It was really good, and it's really wonderful how well they can cook in Sweden. One of the things they do best, though, is desserts. If you ever run into a bakery, make sure that you get out of there as quickly as possible, because it's really easy to buy a lot of things in a bakery. They really know how to make baked goods really good. They have this thing that I kind of miss called vanilla sauce, and they would always have it on pie. Sometimes it would even seem like they're having pie on their vanilla sauce. But one of my absolute favorite things that I took with me from Sweden was this thing called kladdkaka. It's basically a mud cake, kind of. It's like a brownie, but a lot better, where it's gooey in the middle. And by gooey, I mean like you think you undercooked it, and that's how you know you did it right. And it's absolutely good. You serve that with some vanilla ice cream, and it's the best. But the food there, a lot of it is much more organic than what we have here. They have different standards for their food. And an interesting thing that I noticed is you don't actually have to refrigerate your eggs in Sweden. Now, it's a good idea to do it because they last longer if you do refrigerate them, but you don't have to. So don't be weirded out when you see that at the grocery store. But a lot of what they eat is similar things to what we eat. Italian food, what we call American food, like hamburgers and things like that. They have meatballs. That's probably their biggest specialty, meatballs and potatoes. But a lot of really good things there. Swedish culture and American culture are very different. In Sweden, instead of going over to your neighbor and complaining about this pile of leaves they left in front of, like between your two houses, in Sweden, instead of going to them and complaining about that, they would write a note, leave it on your door anonymously, or they might just call the police and have them basically talk to you about it. Swedes are not people to be confronted or to confront people. On buses and trains especially, people will sit there and not speak to each other. See a group of young Swedes sitting together, and you think they're friends, and they're all sitting there on their phones, not really paying attention to each other, definitely not speaking to each other. And if someone starts speaking pretty loud, you better stop, because that's dangerous. Swedes have this phrase, this word actually called lagom. It basically means not too hot, not too cold. You're just right. That's kind of a watered down version of what it means, but that's basically how the culture is. You don't want to stick out too much, but you want to stick out enough. Like you can't be too unique, but you still need to be unique. And it's something that's very hard for a lot of people to understand, but you'll catch on as you're there. It's something that's really cool to see, actually. And I've noticed that I've taken a lot of that stuff back with me. I often find myself doing things that are very Swedish, as a lot of people will call it. I didn't notice much of a difference, but now as I look at it and compare how I act to how other people act, I see that I act very much like Swedish people act. And I think it's because I've taken a lot of that culture with me. Swedes are very kind and loyal people. Once you've made friends with a Swedish person, they are your friend. A lot of Swedes don't really have that friend they met the other week, or that friend from college even. A lot of their friends have been their friends since they were born, basically. They were their childhood friends that they met when they were in dagis, in daycare. And they've been friends ever since and haven't really changed who their friends are, who they hang out with. A lot of Swedes don't even know their neighbors. So don't be offended if your Swedish neighbors aren't saying hi to you all the time. It's just because they don't know you. And because they don't know you, they're kind of a hard shell to crack open to get to know you. They don't want to break that barrier because that would be sticking out too much to get to know your neighbors sometimes. It depends on the area that you live in, and it depends on the Swedish person, because you find all ranges of people in all different cultures. But that's typical in Sweden, is for people to be very reserved and harder to become acquainted with. But they are very loyal. They will do anything for you once they know that you really care about them and once they really care about you. I really love Swedish people because of that. Another thing that I really like is how peaceful things are. Sweden's very peaceful. They're kind of pacifistic in their foreign policies, which has really helped them a lot. They haven't had serious wars over in Sweden for the past 200 years. But the people are the same way. They don't like to pick fights. They won't complain about something unless it needs to be brought up. One of the wonderful things about Sweden is there's a lot of open nature. There's a lot of parks, there's a lot of greenery. It's really interesting. In America, you think we're going out in the forest, we're going to see cabins, maybe. We might see some sort of shelter, but like the biggest thing you'd see is a cabin or a house, something like that. You don't expect to see an apartment building sitting out in the middle of nowhere. But in Sweden, you will run into that. Be going through the forest, and on your right, you'll see an apartment building in the middle of nowhere. And it's really interesting how they do that. But Swedes are very conservative well, not conservative, they're very sensitive to nature. They really appreciate nature and don't want those things to get ruined or go away. And so nature is something that's very important to them. There's beautiful landscapes, lots of places to camp, lots of hiking, biking, wonderful things. One thing specific to Stockholm is the archipelago that's around Stockholm. It's beautiful. We weren't allowed to go there on a private boat, but they do have a boat bus that takes you from central Stockholm out to this island. And so we got to take that once and see a few of the islands and the beautiful landscape that is in the Stockholm archipelago. As a result of Swedes really liking this nature, they try to be very friendly to the environment by recycling a lot. I remember going to one of my areas and you had to separate literally everything. You had your burnable waste in one place, your white paper in another place, colored paper in another place, newspapers in a third place. Envelopes had to be separate. They were in the burning pile. You had your light plastics in one place, your plastic containers in another place. You had colored glass, clear glass, aluminum, or not aluminum, but like metal cans and metal packaging, batteries, scrap metal, CDs and DVDs. They separated everything though. It seemed a little excessive to me, but it's because they really care about the environment and want it to flourish and not die. And it's a really interesting thing because now as I've come back home, I see myself trying to sort things, and we don't quite have the same opportunity here in America to recycle like they do in Sweden because of the way things are set up here. One of the great things that also comes as a part of this environmental friendliness is the public transportation system. And it's really good in Stockholm. In all of my areas, I used buses at least once. One of my areas, we did have a car that was our primary mode of transportation, but there was a tricky situation. We ended up taking a bus to get from one city to another. But for the most part, it was public transportation that I used in Sweden. A lot of trains, buses, subways, different things like that. I once took a boat to get to an island called Visby. But the public transportation system works really well. You have timetables, maps. It's a good thing to learn how to use. If you don't know how to navigate a city map, you should probably look up a map and start working on that. It's not hard. You really can look at what you're looking for on the side. It'll have like a little key, and then you find the place that you're looking for and you look on the grid, and it'll have it labeled like F6. And so you look at F6, just like in Battleship, and it's right there what you're looking for. One other important thing about Sweden is what they call sambo. It's a big thing in their culture. A lot of Swedish people aren't married but live together. And they'll probably have lived together for a few years, potentially 40 or 50. It was weird for me at first, but I see the reasoning once I learned about the legal things, the logistics about marriage and becoming sambo in Sweden. What they'll basically do is they'll get an agreement, though, that's saying we're going to live together and here's how our assets are going to be divided in case we break off this agreement. And you'll have people having kids together and outside of wedlock because they live together. So most of the year, Sweden is very cold, very harsh climate. It's very dark. The other half of the year, it's very light and it's a paradise, except that it rains a lot. I'm not a big fan of the rain, but other people might be, and that's good because Sweden is a very wet country, very green. Specifically, when I was serving up north in the winter, I was in a city called Sundsvall. It was very cold. It would get down to negative 18 Celsius and lower. It got down below negative 20 Celsius, which is below 0 Fahrenheit. So that's just the raw temperature as well. It got really cold and it's dark. And then we were also by the ocean, so it's also very humid. We'd have 100% humidity most of the days during the winter. And then you also have to factor in wind chill. And during the summer, it's absolutely beautiful. You're so high up in latitude that during the summer, it never gets dark. You will see light out the entire time. In the winter, vitamin D is your friend though, because sun gives you vitamin D. And when you aren't exposed to as much sunlight like you are in the winter, vitamin D really helps. In Sweden, a majority of families have both parents working. Swedes have a high standard of living. They aren't struggling to get by with money. They really do have a lot of money, and you'll see that a lot in Sweden. It's a really good economy as far as the standard of living. There's a lot of jobs in technology. That's probably the thing I saw the most, with people working with computers, with videos, with music, specifically within technology spheres of those different spheres. There's a lot of music that actually comes from Sweden, a surprising amount that people probably don't know about. An easy one that people probably do know about, those Swedish House Mafia, ABBA, but there's a lot more of music that we don't know as much about that's actually from Sweden.